Good evening, I'm Maciej Bikos and you're watching World Talks. British media report that President-elect Donald Trump is changing his views on further military help for Ukraine. Trump has allegedly also informed the European NATO allies they should spend some 5% of GDP on defense purposes. And to talk about it all, we're joined by Professor Alberto Coll from DePaul University College of Law. Good evening.
Good evening.
So, Professor, first of all, do you believe Financial Times report that Donald Trump indeed would like to continue supporting Ukraine after all his remarks from the presidential campaign, when he explicitly stated that Kyiv should expect absolutely way less support from the US in 2025?
Yes, I think that, as you know, many politicians, in fact, most politicians say some things during the campaign trail. And then when they come into office and they come face to face with the realities of governing, they realize that some of the things they said were too far. I think now that Trump is face to face with the prospect of actually being the president of the United States in about a month, that a number of his closest advisors have been pointing out to him that to stop aiding Ukraine when he comes into office would mean giving Russia a tremendous advantage over the United States. And I think that these advisors have been putting the issue to him in terms of the American national interest. They have been saying, look, this is not charity to Ukraine. This is a matter of, do you really want to be known as the American president on whose watch Ukraine was taken over by Russia, and that the United States basically lost an ally and a friend and put the security of our European allies at greater risk because of that. So I think that Trump also, by the way, is a bargainer, and he has been persuaded by his advisors that continuing aid to Ukraine actually gives him leverage over Putin, that he can use this to put pressure on Putin eventually to come to the negotiating table.
But I wonder, what advisors are you talking about? Because apart from Marco Rubio, the vast majority of his future cabinet is rather reluctant to help Ukraine in any way. And I'm also talking about his own son, right? Who wrote famously some weeks ago that the money for Ukraine will come to an end soon.
I think Trump has a very wide range of friends, by the way, a number of them in high finance and high business. His Secretary of the Treasury, for example, Scott Bessent. He's got people like Elon Musk. And they all share the perspective that the United States has to help Ukraine, because to do so would do tremendous damage to America's long-term interests and to America's position in the world, and that it would wind up hurting us economically and financially and putting us in a greater threat geopolitically. So again, you can have Tucker Carlson, you can have Don Jr. And people like that saying different things about Ukraine. But a number of the people that are actually going to be wielding positions of responsibility, including, as you said, Marco Rubio, are saying to him, look, this is not the time to take away one of the United States' bargaining chips in negotiating with Putin, trying to get him to the table. How are you going to get him to the table if you've already taken Ukraine aid off the table? Mm-hmm. So these are the things that sometimes, the media does not focus on, but it's the reality. It's called the reality of governing. And Trump, as you know, has a big ego. He's very focused on the idea of winning and not losing. And I think some of the people that want to continue aid to Ukraine have been saying to him very quietly, hey, do you want to be the loser here? Do you want to be known as the people who lost this geopolitical game with Vladimir Putin? And what will the consequences of that be for your presidency and for how you would be remembered?
But I'm still wondering, how will he present it to his voters, right? Because basically to support Ukraine would mean to continue Biden's policy. So I guess he has to do something
that he will do
differently, right?
No, he will do it differently. And what he will say is, he will say, I'm the one who also persuaded Europe to start aiding Ukraine more seriously. And you and I know that Europe has already started to help Ukraine more seriously. But he will sell it to his voters and say the previous administration wanted the US to carry the sole burden of aiding Ukraine. And now I'm the one who has persuaded the Europeans to get very serious about aiding Ukraine. And so, yes, we are going to sell Ukraine some weapons. And a lot of that aid, by the way, is going to come in the form of sales. Of course, his followers are not going to be told that the sales are going to be financed with loans that Ukraine probably will not have to pay for the next 30 years. So he will say Ukraine will be buying American weapons made in American factories, and this is much better than the Biden administration, which was giving away weapons to Ukraine. That's how he will market it. And most of his followers, I think, will buy this very easily.
And what about allocating 5% of GDP by European NATO countries? Now, it doesn't sound really realistic. It wasn't that long ago that it was hard to reach the 2% threshold, right? Now, Donald Trump is talking about 5%.
Yes, again, this is Trump acting like the New York real estate developer, the businessman, the bargainer. I think in his own mind, he knows it'll be quite a lift to get Europeans to spend up to 3 to 4%. But the reality is that Trump on this issue has a very good point. That there are European countries, obviously not Poland, obviously not Estonia, not Greece, which spend a very serious amount of their GDP on defense. But there are many European countries, including, by the way, even today, Germany, France, Italy, and Spain, which spend very inappropriately low percentages of their GDP on their military. And the United States is saying, look, if you want to have a serious alliance, European countries have to put more money on the table. And I think that this argument, by the way, has gained currency in many European capitals because many European leaders have realized that the United States is not going to be tied to Europe indefinitely unless the United States leadership feels that Europe is pulling its own weight. And, a lot of Americans come to Europe and they see these wonderful welfare states, great benefits, 35-hour work weeks. And it's a much better situation in terms of the welfare state than the United States has. But that comes at the cost of not spending enough on the military. Will we reach 5%? I don't think so. But definitely it's a big number to aim for. And I think that if we're very fortunate and we push hard enough, everybody will start realizing that 3 to 4% is essential, again, at a time when Europe has not been in any greater danger than today, since 1945. Everybody needs to wake up to that.
So, yes, we know that Donald Trump is apparently raising the stakes, like, as you said, as he's a businessman. But could there be some other sort of a deal on the table, like we don't pay 4%, but we give you some preferable trade deals or something like that? Because, well, that's also his primary goal, right?
Yeah, I think, well, it's one of his goals, definitely. I think you've put your finger right on one of the big issues. And this is why, for example, some of the European Union leaders have been talking about Europe making more serious commitments to buying American liquefied natural gas and buying certain American products that Europe buys anyway from other countries. And so the idea is, for example, Europe should stop buying Russian gas, period. No Russian gas at all. And Europe should buy more gas from the United States. So these kinds of deals, as you point out, could be a way of a greater package, which Trump can use to persuade his followers that, hey, I'm the one who got a better deal for the U.S. than the one we had under Biden.
And if Europeans fail, to quote Donald Trump, to pay their bills, could he be really considering withdrawing from NATO?
I don't think this is going to happen. I think that our European allies are increasingly conscious of the threat from Russia. Okay? And of course, that's true of Poland, but it's also true of the Nordic countries, and it's increasingly true of many other states that are coming to terms with the reality that, hey, here we have an American president who might lead Ukraine down the tube. If so, what are we going to have to do? So just the prospect of that happening means that I think Europe will respond, our European allies will respond much more forcefully. I think that Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO, he has dealt with Trump before. He knows how to deal with Trump. And he will be a key team player in negotiating these differences and in actually part of a broader effort to get Europe to spend more on defense more seriously. But I don't see a realistic scenario as Europe refusing to spend more money on defense or refusing to buy more liquefied natural gas from the United States, and then Trump saying we are leaving NATO. The chance of that happening, I think, are nil.
Yet, Mark Rutte is a big advocate for Ukraine joining NATO, and Donald Trump says never. May he change his views again?
I think that there are ways of dealing with this. I mean, for example, you could have a deal in which Ukraine agrees not to join NATO for, let's say, 25 years, for 30 years. But in exchange for that, Ukraine would get very serious security guarantees from a number of states individually, as well as substantial commitments to sell Ukraine the weapons that it needs, so that even without Ukraine being part of NATO, it would make it very difficult, very costly for Russia in the future to invade Ukraine again. Imagine a scenario in which, yes, Ukraine formally does not get to join NATO, but Europe and the United States facilitate Ukrainian purchases, for example, of large numbers of air defenses, large numbers of strike weapon systems, and air assets, and so on. Then it's going to be incredibly difficult for Russia to contemplate in the future another Ukrainian invasion.
But Professor, what makes us feel relatively safe is the assurance from the US that if Russians use a nuclear bomb against NATO, we will respond the same way. Now, can Ukrainians think about similar assurances? I don't think so.
No, but look, all the Russians. Now, first of all, once you talk about the nuclear threshold, that's another story. I think even Donald Trump, if Putin were to use a nuclear weapon against Ukraine today, I think you would see the United States responding very forcefully. And by the way, we do not have to use nuclear weapons against Russia to respond. We could use some very devastating conventional weapons that we have right now in our arsenal. For example, to totally obliterate the Russian Black Sea Fleet, what's left of it. And that Putin knows that. Putin knows that the United States have massive conventional capabilities with which we could respond even to a limited nuclear strike by him. So that's another story, this nuclear threshold. But in the meantime, if Russia is contemplating, let's say, relaunching an invasion of Ukraine 4 or 5 years from now, if Ukraine has very strong military defenses in place, it would be very, very costly for them. And I think the Russians would have to think about it twice, okay? And of course, there would be some guarantees by some European countries to come to Ukraine's aid with conventional capabilities and so on. So this would really change the game. I don't think that it is so simple as to say, well, unless you extend to Ukraine a nuclear umbrella, Russia is going to take it over in 2 years.
Professor Alberto Coll from DePaul University College of Law was our guest tonight. Thank you so much, Professor.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for watching, and stay with us for more here on TVP World.